Well, hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Deviant Collective podcast. We are very excited to be here. We're going to introduce ourselves properly in just a second, but the Deviant Collective is two things. We are creators who like to create interesting art and poetry and imagery around where culture intersects with art and horror and sexuality. In fact, art and horror and sexuality, everything that's naughty and dirty and horrible and yuck. And we're also looking to actually put some work out there for other people and start publishing and running some workshops on what we do. So this is all very new. We weren't going to do this, and we just saw The Substance and decided we were just going to go. So excuse us for not being too polished. We're just going to do it because we want to have this conversation before we get too far away from the film, and then we'll have something a little bit more structured going forward. But we wanted to really make sure, I think, our voices joined this debate really, really quickly about an absolutely amazing horror film that is absolutely up the Deviant Collective's boat, so to speak. So I'm Dr. Tracy Heather Johnson. I am a poet, writer, coach and photographer. Juliet, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Juliet Sugg, and I'm an artist and lecturer specialising in the monstrous feminine and all things transgressive and naughty. So yeah, we're in good company, I think, aren't we?
We are. I think all things transgressive and naughty is probably our signature on the Deviant Collective email. Transgressive and naughty is just about right. And transgressive and naughty was The Substance in lots of ways. And we are massive film buffs. We're both horror addicts. We are in very good company with the people that we talk to, like Evolution of Horror, Mary Wild, lots of lovely people we've been desperate to have our say in the conversation with about this film. And I think generally the films of Coralie Fargeat, the French director who made The Substance, which has just been this behemoth that's taken over cinema discussion recently. And we have not planned this. We're just going to go straight in. And I'm going to ask Juliet a question to start with, because it's really Jules that kickstarted this. Basically, both of us got really, really excited. We saw The Substance within 24 hours of each other, and Jules very kindly didn't give me any spoilers, and I went in and came out going, oh my God, it's amazing. And we had a really big collective rant about a certain type of review that had come out about the film. And I think that's probably a really good place to start, Jules. Sorry, it's going with the hard stuff straight away.
Yeah, well, I think that I was already excited about The Substance. I can't lie and say that it was a fresh slate, because it was on my radar, but I wasn't prepared for how joyous I think it made me feel. And as you know, I kind of became really hyper focused and wanted to kind of consume everybody's thoughts about it, and was quite shocked to hear that there was a bit of a backlash. And I have to say, mainly from women, British women, actually. So, or sort of, yeah, I'm not kind of tying everybody with the same brush, but it interested me that it had this sort of anti-feminist counter argument, when for me it was really something quite spectacular and very feminist. So I think it was lovely to talk to you and, you know, our friends Mike Munzer and Mary Wild, to kind of feel like actually perhaps we're not alone in why we particularly love this film.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think looking at Fargeat's previous two movies, so there's a 22-minute short in my best French accent, Réalité Plus, Réalité Plus, which actually looks at a very similar theme, which is enhancing the way that we look for a certain amount of time and having to balance that with the time when we are our actual selves. So it was a really lovely precursor. And what I found fascinating about that, and I'm sure we're going to feed this into the discussion, is initially a lot of that was around men's self-consciousness around body image, which is really is something that we ought to discuss with this as well, because there is, I think, increasing amounts of pressure on men to look a certain way. As you know, and a lot of the listeners obviously won't know, I've spent 10 years also working in the fitness industry, and it can be a very pressured environment, and people within it who work within it can feel they need to look a certain way, which is not true. What you need to be really good at is coaching. You should be a good coach. You've got to be good with people and good listener most of the time. The exercise tends to be by the by. But I think that first short's highlighting a lot of stuff around male body image too. I think it sets up that really nice dynamic of kind of half on, half off, which she looks at in The Substance. And Revenge, very, again, like The Substance, hyper realistic I think she loves setting up her own universes where kind of normal rules don't apply, which is why some of these reviews annoy me, because I don't think you can apply what we might call traditional standards to these movies that inhabit their complete own world, really. She's really paying lip service to being in contemporary society, I think. Reality Plus doesn't do that at all. It's definitely set in Paris of the future. So I think that's the thing that got to me the most, is she's got form with looking at these themes. And I think The Substance was really evolving that to a much higher level. And it's a lot more, for me, I don't know how you feel, it feels like a much more layered film, and it's approaching things from many more different angles and with layers than I think people have given it credit for.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the conversations we had around it really early on is, I think there's a huge difference between silliness and stupidness. And I've heard a lot of the negative criticism circling around this idea that it is in some way stupid, that the plot doesn't make sense, or the world is too fantastical, that it can't be taken seriously, or that it has such a strange tonal shift. We're going for spoilers, right? We're just going to
Yes, we are. This is totally spoilerific. From now on, everybody just alert. There we go. Going to ruin it for everybody.
Exactly. So, the kind of Alyssa Sue moment, that it has this great big tonal shift. But I think something, and I think you agree with me, is, for me, silly and stupidity are very different things. Stupidity is about, for me, a sort of naivety and ignorance. And I don't think anything about any of her movies are ignorant. I think that the decisions that are made within it are made very consciously, whether you like them or not. And so there's this sort of strange, for me, snobbery around genre that's poked up its head with The Substance, where I think there are plenty of other films in other genres where to dip into that world of kind of surrealism and absurdity and Grand Guignol, bonkersness, doesn't get as pulled apart as this was. And it was almost like people wanted the subject, because it was so heavy, to be something really seriously displayed. And I actually think it is an incredibly serious film. I actually think it has a real, like a really strong message that isn't about saying this is right and this is wrong. It's about kind of an empathy, actually, and a real sort of feeling. And so I think that's what frustrates me, because when we look at her other films, and I only recently saw God, I keep wanting to say Canal Plus, Reality Plus.
Lots of films on Canal Plus.
I know, exactly. If you name anything. Everybody will know that. Well, everybody won't know. Tracy's very good at correcting me when I go slightly off piste, so I'm very grateful for my pronunciations go AWOL.
I'll try and do it nicely.
You do. You help me massively. But I think I was quite surprised to feel like that was actually very much almost a romantic comedy that takes, again, a sort of interesting shift towards the end. And as you know, Tracy, I don't love revenge, but it's not because I think it's a bad film. It's because it's, I think, very much an action film and a survivalist film. And that just isn't my bag in the same way that The Substance is. The Substance, I think, is very much leaning into quite schlocky horror and to a sort of heritage of body horror that is bonkers, and isn't fine-tuned around the edges. And so I think that this idea that she isn't conscious is really irritating to me, because those other films for me prove that she knows what she's doing every time she kind of makes a decision.
I completely agree with you. And I absolutely think, she's drawing on more than the horror genre a lot of the time. She really is going in Revenge, certainly is an action movie. But I think with for me, with the Substance is, people, I think, went in expecting Cronenberg type body horror, which is, I love David Cronenberg, but he is very self-consciously intellectual about it. Just like if you compare her with Julia Ducournau, so Raw and Titane, both set in a very recognizable world, quite extreme and fantastical, but yet they get taken very seriously. The penny dropped for me, and this isn't something that I shared with you yet, because I only came across this the other day. I read an interview with Coralie Fargeat. She said, yes, there's body horror. Yes, there is a tradition of it, but I wasn't going for Cronenberg. I was going for the schlocky trash of Paul Verhoeven.
There you go.
That's exactly what she's done. She's given it that almost, it felt for me really a bit like RoboCop, with the ad breaks and everything being really exaggerated, going for the kind of 1980s Jane Fonda, Jamie Lee Curtis in Perfect. And she said, that's the ultimate of body image. You have to be perfect. in everything that you do. So she's creating a world of her own, and it's not a high art that she's trying to draw on. She's drawing very much on the horror genre, and I think, and throwing in all these really vulgar, schlocky, trashy Verhoeven cliches. And God knows I love Paul Verhoeven. Everyone knows I'm a Basic Instinct fan. I love RoboCop. I love Total Recall. I think he does extreme beautifully, and I think she ties that up really well with a concept we probably best define for some people, which is the abject, because I don't want to get accused of being overly wanky and academic. So the abject in cultural theory is just, it kind of comes from social anthropology as well, which is where it's all the stuff to do with the body, like secretions, mucus, poop, menstrual blood, snot, all the things that we find repugnant and are meant to remind us that we are bodies that ooze and secrete things. She puts all that up on the screen. She brings it all back from where it's normally repressed very politely. I can hear Mary Wilde screaming "Return of the Repressed" at me and her Freudian psychoanalysis. But I think that's very much what the way we were kind of looking at it, wasn't it? It's this. She loves taking stuff that's abject and just chucking it at you with gallons of bodily fluids and goo.
It's funny, actually. I was talking to a friend that had just been to see it, and I've watched so much gore, and I think you're the same, that my kind of level of shock is quite hard. And I kept being surprised to hear people saying, "Oh God, it's a really shocking film. It's a really grotesque film." And I guess it is. But that didn't necessarily disturb me. The thing that really disturbed me the most in the entire film, and it's such an odd moment, is when Sue is sort of looking at the empty, there's no more of the substance left. She's gone too far. And it's this kind of horrible, yellowy, white, sort of almost like fat, like the fat in a I don't know, like a frying pan.
Oh, it's like rendered fat that sits on the top. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's weird, but that was the most disgusting idea. The idea that this was something she was about to, put into her body, or that was even coming out of Demi Moore's body. Like, it really, that's the thing that threw me. Of everything, that's the thing that kind of gave me the abject. Bleh.
It's for me to actually, it was the constant spinal tap and the mess it was making of the wound site, with the goo, and then drawing out that almost like pus that she was going to put in herself in total desperation. And this split between this older woman, not an old woman, a mature woman, who is feeling self-conscious. She's feeling like her career's ended because she's been told by the very masculine environment that she's in that her career is now over, even though anyone would kill still to have Demi Moore's body at that age. She's fit, she's strong, she's healthy, she looks amazing. But we do get the most gorgeous Margaret Qualley coming along as the younger version of her that's released by The Substance, called Sue. She's bouncy, soft, sort of squishy flesh, perfect. And what it made me think of was a conversation actually that I had with my mum relatively recently. And my mum, this is not to diss my mum on a public forum, but she's always she loves everything to look nice and people to look nice. And we've had these conversations before where she'll say something like, "Oh, they've really aged," and I'm like, "Yeah, they have." And for me, what it felt like was having one of these conversations with somebody where it's all about appearances and the way culture has tried to push lots of stuff on us to not age, anti-aging rather than aging well, which is something we all do. We want to age. It's I want to look nice as I'm getting older, but it doesn't mean I'm turning back the clock. It's you've got to be realistic. And I said to my mum, I would not go back to my 20s if you paid me a very large sum of money, because I was a fucking idiot in my 20s. I knew nothing about life. And I made a lot of mistakes. And to me, that feels that is playing out in that film. We are lucky to age because you make good decisions, better decisions, I hope, as you get older. Hopefully we've learned from being Sue as we become Elizabeth. And what's interesting for me, of course, is it's Sue in her youthful, immature, I want more of this, I want more of this, I don't want to go back to that old body, who abuses the substance in the first place and leaves Elizabeth with those awful, like, aging, like, little digit. It starts off just with one horrible digit that she's like, the hell, it's like I've got this old person's finger. Whereas, as an older character, she was going to follow the rules. And exactly. And I think the thing that annoyed me so much about some of those reviews, and I won't name the magazine it was in because it pissed me off royally and I don't want to start a feud with anybody in our first podcast, but they said the film was sour and miserable, and it placed the blame for women's actions and the consequences firmly at the blame of the women's feet. And I felt very much that there was a dialogue going on there between the wisdom of age, the folly of youth, but both of them being forced to take extreme steps because of the very patriarchal culture that they're in the first place. Of course, it's going to go horribly wrong. You know that. There's no point watching a film if it doesn't. It's got to be grotesque. But they make bad decisions, but the whole process is kickstarted by a whole other culture that tells us aging for women makes us redundant, or aging for men makes them redundant. I mean, there's all these. I don't want to gender stereotype, because there's a lot of issues affecting everybody and individuals. But I did feel there's a real dialogue going on there between youth, age, bad decision making, kind of what gets forced on us, and the substance is just pushing that to an extreme of grotesquerie. And you're right, it's not silly, it's absurd in the way that Monty Python is beautifully absurd. I saw Time Stalkers today. Alice Lowe, genius, that woman, creative genius, comic genius. That's totally absurd and surreal, but it's very clever. It's got a lot to say. And I think The Substance is very clever and has a lot to say. And just because it's grotesque and it's silly doesn't, as you say, doesn't make it stupid.
Far from it. I mean, I think I'm going to so if you're listening to this, I'm going to steal your sentence, but what he said to me was what was it, smuggling your vegetables in with the fun stuff, which is like a really good way to look at it. I think for me, sometimes when you're lectured really heavily with a subject, that's what turns us off, because we know we're about to be lectured. We know we're about to be told in some didactic way, what's good and what's bad. And what I think horror does really well is it doesn't necessarily have to have this strict moral compass. It allows you to kind of go into these areas of what if, in absurdity sometimes, and allow you to kind of play with these ideas in your head. And I think that's what she does so well. And I totally agree. I'm kind of furious when people said that what this film does is contribute to a kind of internalized anti-feminism, or that it's, we're not supposed to sympathize with the characters, or we're supposed to hate Elizabeth Smart. And to me, that wasn't apparent anywhere in the film for me. But also that moment in which she's not able to kill Sue, when she stops and says, I can't do this, is exactly that moment of a sort of aging wisdom that hopefully you do get to, where you start going, I cannot continue to hurt myself, and I cannot hate the version of myself that I cannot be. And so for me, it's really ludicrous to kind of look at that as her in some way. I don't know whether people wanted it to have this sort of moral ending. Like I said, they wanted some kind of either a happy ending or a clear cut, this was good and this was bad. For me, it's not about that. And I totally agree with you that the reason I think the one who really loses control is Sue, because she has that kind of, and this isn't to be patronizing to sort of younger women, it's just, I think, something as you get older, you realize how much you do abuse your body at that age, and you don't look at mortality in the same way. So you kind of, you're very, even just drinking alone, right? The things that you put into your body, you're much less concerned with the well-being of it. You are concerned with the external structure of it, how good it looks, and trying to make it look better and like everybody else, and to hide the bits you hate. But the kind of internal care isn't there. And I think it's really interesting that for Elizabeth, that doesn't come until that sort of horrific moment at the end, where she suddenly goes, I can't do this to you. We are the same person. To me, that's beautiful.
Yes, it is. And I think it on a personal level, really, it's that thing, isn't it, where we look at photographs of ourselves from 10, 20 years ago, and why didn't I see I look good? Exactly. Why didn't I appreciate how I was back then? Because it's just a constant kind of noticing now of the infrastructure not quite being what it was, but having to think that's normal. It's totally normal. And also, look where I am in my life right now, and I couldn't have done all the things I'm doing now if I was that age. There's no confidence, there's no authority, there's no respect for the body and all the things we put ourselves through. I think you can make better choices. And I think, coming back to an issue to do with the gaze, which is something both of us have really talked about with Fargeat's films, because so many people were talking about, she's always got that camera on Sue's ass, Margaret Qualley's ass. Yes, she does. And it's with a huge dose of irony, because you get it in Revenge. She sets it up in Revenge as well, where what's her name? Jennifer, the main character. She's walking around. She's very comfortable in her body in a way that I always wished I could be. There's nothing moving on that body. Everything's just in place, and you're just like, wow, I'm admiring as a woman, just going, wow, that's a great body. She's fit, she's healthy, all these things, and she seems very comfortable in the way she's moving with it. And it's not until those two men unexpectedly arrive and they're staring at her through the glass that you realize the gaze in the film has shifted, and it's like two hungry hyenas sizing up a kill. And she kind of runs with that, I think, in that film, because Jennifer refuses to be cowed. Initially, you can see she's really self-conscious. She goes with it again. She performs, she dances. She doesn't do anything wrong. Let's be clear on that. The men overstep the mark, because we know it's a rape revenge film. There's nothing she does. They invade her space. They tread on Richard's toes, her duplicitous asshole of a boyfriend who does despicable things in that film. And I think it's really interesting in that the way it's shot, it really does make her look predated on. And it makes you, as you say, it's morally, the moral compass is shifting while you're watching that film all the way through. And of course, at the end, I mean, what you get is a really long shot of Richard naked in the shower. Is a very prolonged. It's like, yeah, here you are. You can have this too. It's very equal. This one's for you. Yeah, very equal opportunities with Coralie Fargeat. And I think in The Substance, that's how it feels to me. She's saying, look at this glossy, hyper real surface, bouncy body. It doesn't exist. It's not real. Have a really good look at it. Do you honestly think that's reality? It's almost, for me, it's almost impossible to be titillated by it because of the way it's presented as hyper real, and quite problematic in the terms of how that body has been realized, I think.
You need it for the punch. I think the scene in which Sue has that sort of dream, I think it's a dream, I'm not entirely sure whether it's real or not, where the chicken leg, essentially, she kind of starts to feel it in her ass and then it comes through her stomach or her belly button. And for me, that's that kind of stealing putting your vegetables in the good stuff, because you need the punch of kind of looking at something and going, yeah, I understand this language. God, it's, even as a woman, I'm a bisexual woman as well. I probably am, enjoying that moment, but also like going, God, yeah, fuck yeah, I want to work out and I want to get an ass like that. And then to pull that out, it is the perfect way to really pack that punch, because you do go, oh God.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't work without that, right? And it's the same. I sort of talked to you in depth with such a strange relationship with the film Revenge, because I feel like I think it's such a good film, but it's not a film that I enjoy. However, when I kind of start to pull it apart, I do see a similar kind of control of every single beat. And I love that dance scene right at the beginning, because that sets everything up again to go, okay, what are you going to do with this information? You're going to see her do this, and then you're going to see her get raped. And what's your moral compass on this? Obviously I think, and I hope that most people now sit on the stance of, there's no absolutely no excuse for her to be raped. She did nothing wrong. But I think if you didn't have that scene there, it doesn't push you in the same way. And so I think it's similar things. It's like they may be obvious, they may be having to kind of tap into uncomfortable ways of using the gaze, but it's there very much as part of a narrative chain. It's not just chucked in.
No.
And I think, like, I've heard people criticize the fact that, oh yeah, but Demi Moore's body is so beautiful anyway. I mean, it doesn't really work to have her there. That's the point, right? She's got this incredible figure.
Yes.
That I would have killed for in my when I was 19, let alone, in my 40s, let alone in my 60s. Let's not forget she's a 60-year-old woman playing a 50-year-old. Yeah, exactly.
Incredible.
Beautiful body. But to me, that's the point. We look at it and yeah, we probably do objectify it, even in those bathroom scenes. But that's the point, that you're going, why are you doing this to yourself? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. You are already a beautiful, healthy woman. Why do you feel the need to do this? Because the pressure is coming externally. Yeah. And she's hopefully okay with herself until it's pointed out that other people might not be. And then suddenly you're looking at it yourself going, but what? Oh, there is something wrong. And there isn't anything wrong with her at all. At all. She's incredible. And we had this discussion because I also being having worked in fitness and trained people and all this stuff is I was looking at her body on the floor. She's doing full frontal nudity at 60. And I'm just looking at her going, wow, she's fit and strong, healthy. That's a really healthy body to have at that age. How dare someone say you're past it, you're not aspirational anymore? And it ties in beautifully with that opening really long scene of the Hollywood star, because she's a finished end of career actress, and how the star just gets trashed over a period of time with people walking over it and dropping their hot dogs on it and crap. It's such a beautifully set up in your face metaphor. It's not subtle, but it's so well done. To compare that with this awful degeneration of something that there was nothing wrong with in the first place. And I think you're right, that is the point that's made there. She's made to feel that way. And then she puts it all on herself. To go from that Hollywood star, the disintegration of Elizabeth, the emergence of Sue, and then the degeneration that is the monstro that they become, which is, I would say, one of the funniest, most absurd things I've ever seen in my life. I couldn't believe she did what she did with that scene, where you have Sue and Elizabeth Sparkle have created one body. It's the most grotesque thing you've ever seen. It's all the wrong angles, like a Picasso nightmare. Everything's in the wrong place. There's bumps and goo. There's a third breast that emerges and literally falls onto the floor, which obviously just totally sending up any kind of, gaze directed at the woman's body. But the fact that she's heaving this hideous, monstrous body in this beautiful, like Oscar red carpet dress, but with a printed photograph of Demi's face stuck to it with lipstick on it, and everybody in the corridors clapping and cheering at this facade of this monster she's become. And I just thought, well done. That's about as far as you could have pushed it, and you went there. And it's the absurdity of standards and appearances for women in a certain milieu, let's say. And I just thought, yeah, you've really gone as far with that as you could go. And I really give you when the boob fell on the floor, somebody actually grabbed their bag and ran out of the cinema.
we there was literally a whoop of joy in our cinema. We were literally like, yeah. That's another, it's really an obvious one, but it's a really good example of kind of, before Eliza Sue walks onto the stage and you've got all of your kind of dancing starlets with their tits out, and I could feel my friend to the right kind of bristle, and she was having that moment of like, did they really need to have their tits out? Like, do we need to have this point made? But then when that kind of that boob is kind of regurgitated out of her, it's like, that's all you need to say that's why the tits are out. Like, this is what we're doing. It's so beautifully played. And I love that, I love the idea that nobody even really twigs what's going on until the mask falls off.
Yes.
Which is the plasticity of the whole thing, isn't it?
Isn't
it's absurd, but it's brilliant.
It's wonderful. It's true, because I it was like Crazy Horse Paris, wasn't it? It's all the topless dancers, and I'm like, oh great, what's she doing with this now? There's got to be something. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's not a wardrobe malfunction a la Janet Jackson where a boob just comes out of a bra. She generates a whole third breast, and her body literally regurgitates it, and there's this long moment where, like a bead of snot building momentum, it goos and just hangs and then just plops onto the stage. And that's when the audience finally realizes something's wrong with what's in front of them. It is extraordinary. And then of course with buckets of blood absolutely everywhere, or whatever it was, I can't remember, is it blood or it was it was blood everywhere. Of course she does. It goes all Carrie, which is great. It's obviously another influence, and she knows exactly what she's doing. She's drawing on all those influences. That breast being generated and then rejected from the body in front of all these topless beautiful women, that's pure Verhoeven to me. That would be something out of like Total Recall with all those bodies and things like that. She knows exactly what she's doing. It was I just thought it was one of the best things I'd ever seen in cinema. I just thought it was such a great move to pull.
This is it as well. I get kind of frustrated with people saying, as you know, I've had this conversation with you, like people saying, oh, she's just chucking references in there without there being a reason. Well, obviously Carrie has a reason if you're talking about the monstrous feminine, but also if you think about if you think about the beginning of Carrie and all of that horrible kind of soft core real male gay shit around the young girls in the changing room,
Yes.
which to me is like perfectly mirrored then with the kind of dancing girls and the tits out, and then this tit just flopping out of out of a Lizasu. And it's the same with The Shining. You know, I've heard so many people kind of say, well, why The Shining? It makes no sense. But I'm like, well, what's the most, you know, okay, maybe the axe scene is the most famous scene. What's one of the most other famous scenes that we think of in The Shining? It is the bathroom scene. It is seeing this woman who looks like a kind of beautiful young, you know, femme fatale. Jack starts to kiss. He looks in the mirror and she turns into this old hag who is rotting. Like, of course, The Shining is a reference for this film. And that scene where she's in the toilets, I think, really early on in the red toilets, and it's the first time we see Dennis Quaid's character, Harvey, in that brilliant kind of extreme face up for close up. It's the same thing where I just think, okay, this is talking about male toxicity, which to me is what kind of The Shining is doing even before we use the term male toxicity. So again, you know, I think she's leaning in, just like Carrie, to, and you know, Brian De Palma, these quite complicated tropes of horror that we've, especially those of us that are really into it, that we know and recognize and is part of our language, but saying, you know, I'm going to do something interesting with this and get you to think about it, but also in a very joyous, fun, silly, absurd way. To me, that's poetry.
It is. It's very, very specific, and it drives me nuts when people say, "Oh, it's just a casual reference." It's like, who writes a screenplay and who directs without every single, it's like a chef tweezing stuff into place on the plate. She knows exactly what she's doing and where it's going. And it drives me a bit nuts that people have done that and nitpicked for it. Why can't, with some filmmakers, it's homage.
Yeah.
Why can't she be paying homage as well to all her stuff that she thinks is great that she's chucked into this really original film? It's a very, that's the thing, it's such an original film, yet it wears its references on its sleeve, but she's thrown it all in the blender and come up with something completely new. It's a new substance, isn't it? It's a new synthesis. She has synthesized something really original out of all this existing stuff, and it's really unique. And I'd be really proud to have that on my CV. Geez, and the quality of the actors that she's managed to for it to be an English language film. Dennis Quaid is amazing, as you say. She's very good in all her movies at using extreme close up to make you again gets that sense of the abject. It's the pause. It's the saliva. It's the chewing. The way he eats the prawns. Oh.
That's horrible, isn't it?
And the sound design she always has that gets you almost like it's gone drilling into your brain and you can't get away from it. And it works so well in this film because it is so squelchy.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, the prawn scene? Because it was making me think in Revenge as well. I can't remember the name. Who's the guy that doesn't rape her, but is equally horrific because he walks in and then decides to walk out. And there's that close up of him, like really much. It's disgusting, right?
Yeah, you get the pull on what he's eating and all the bits in his mouth.
That's it.
It's yeah, and he just stands there almost like eating Doritos while he's realizing he's watching a rape, and then just comes out, shuts his door, hears her screaming, and just turns the TV up. It's an extraordinarily difficult moment because you see very little in that rape scene. You hear everything. She does really well with the power of imagination, then not to be exploitative in that moment, but the horror of the willingness to walk away from it. And pretend it's not happening and not help her. I think that's really where the horror of that scene is, and the abjectness of it, because it's done in such close up and he's making such a grotesque, but he's not a grotesque man, the actor. Hello, sorry. He's doing a really great grotesque performance. Oh God, he pays for that later. So
yeah. And again, I think, because I've heard criticism in terms of people saying with Harvey in The Substance that, well, if they're doing a close up of him being disgusting with food, well, that's just, you know, contributing to the idea that food is bad, and aren't we telling women that actually they should be able to be liberal with their bodies? But I think that's the whole point, that no, I don't think I know one woman in my life who can genuinely have a relationship with food where it is that, you know, just casual, or that is that much just something for pleasure to be not thought about. You know, I think that's the point, right? That we watch men, and I'm not saying that men don't suffer from eating disorders either, of course they do, but there is something about a woman seeing a man really just stuff his face without any kind of need to show control, and particularly when it's then posted against the idea of somebody being raped in the background, like that's a punch and a half, right? And so I think again, it's like none of this stuff is casual, like you say.
It's not.
This is all purposefully put there.
It's really interesting actually, because my take on that really grotesque scene of Harvey munching his way through the prawns. And there's, for anyone who's, again, if you've not seen it, we're spoiling it for you, there's shell on, so you've got all the crunching and ripping apart and him sucking out the heads and casting aside, while Elizabeth's sitting there not eating anything and just looking at it and realizing she's basically being fired.
Yeah.
And I read that completely differently, and I felt that those extreme close-ups, that consumption, greedy consumption, was very much, he is grotesque. He's being positioned as grotesque and repellent, and yet she is this beautiful, intelligent, clean, proper creature, proper, clean and proper body, sitting opposite him being told she's not acceptable. That's how I read it. He is disgusting and repellent, but he gets to tell this object of beauty, this perfect example of a successful woman, suddenly she's redundant. And that's how I read it. I didn't even think of it in terms of eating or disorders or anything like that at all. My brain just didn't work quite like that to interpret. I'm just like, you're repellent, and yet somehow she's redundant.
But I think that's part of the same cycle. It's kind of, it's a different focus, but it's part of the same conversation. It is that thing of going, a man can eat and be grotesque, and it's totally fine.
Yeah,
but you're right,
yeah.
he is then rejecting her, who was doing nothing but sitting at a table looking stunning. Like that, it's, yeah, they're sort of different focuses, but they're the same circle, I think.
I think so. And I think then, of course, that feeds, sorry, it's a terrible pun there. He gives her, of course, after all her service, she gets a French cookery book to keep her busy. Now that she's retired. I know it was just such an insult, but of course it comes into its own at the end with the way in which Elizabeth chooses to punish Sue for taking too many days when she's taken the substance. It's meant to be, isn't it, 1 week on, 1 week off? And she's pushing it, and of course it's Elizabeth that's suffering with the extreme aging, and of course she cooks up a storm and she eats it all, and that's where these protruding chicken bones suddenly start sticking out Sue's perfect ass. And when Sue is emerging again, of course she comes back to this repellent flat and apartment that Elizabeth has left her, and it's like she takes that grotesqueness of Harvey and just runs with it. It's like, you've given me this cookbook, let me cook, let me eat, let me ruin your chances. And I just love how that metaphor kind of runs through it, really. The food itself becomes abject if it's misused in that way. And Sue is so disgusted, I think, probably then by the idea of consumption, because she's wanting to keep this perfect body, and she can't. The food literally pushes itself out of her. There's all this excess, this abject, just what you're repressing is literally going to push itself out of your ass in the form of a chicken bone. It's amazing. Amazing.
There's something, it was interesting because I went to a lecture quite recently on the idea of trauma for women in horror films and the relationship between that, and also as trauma victims, women watching it and getting something out of that. And I think you and I, from the work that we've done in exhibitions, have seen examples of people actually really, leaning into that and kind of saying thank you almost for not playing around with this stuff, because I think we do it seriously, but talking about it with the work that we do. And I think there's something, particularly when we think about the monstrous feminine, that sometimes we forget that there is also this joyousness in the carnivalesque of a woman just letting go and doing all the things that she's not supposed to, air quotes, not supposed to do. So for me as well, her destroying that apartment with nothing but like glutton. I don't see, it's interesting that I'm using the word gluttonous. That sort of shows my own, relationships around food, but this sort of idea that all of this food is smeared around the flat, that there are chocolate wrappers everywhere, that it is what this perfect woman should not be doing to her domesticated space. I think there's also just like, as much as you can see that Elizabeth is struggling with the fact that she's being forced to age each time she wakes up, it gets to the point where she's going, all right, fuck it, I am going to be all the things that I've never been allowed to be before. And there is a certain enjoyment in that. There is a certain kind of like, finally, right?
I agree with you. And I think it's that the use of that term, carnival and carnivalesque, it's Mikhail Bakhtin, is this idea of turning society's norms upside down and celebrating them and being grotesque and disgusting, but absolutely reveling in what you've created. And I think that's it. I never thought of it like that. But yeah, Elizabeth Sparkle goes from being this aesthetically perfect, neat and tidy, clean human being to a monstrous woman who is really getting off on it and likes it and is playing with it and is using to taunt her younger self, who is repelled by all this mess and disgust and excess, and repelled by the body that's aging in front of her each time she sees it. And it's really sad. Those scenes made me sad because it's played so well. It's played so well. And when they literally do fight each other, when they suddenly exist in the same space, which is just an incredible moment in the movie. And Sue is running around after Elizabeth's kind of broken body, and she beats her. I mean, that was for me probably the hardest sequence to watch. She beats her to a pulp, and the viciousness with which she's breaking her and trying to break that body into something because she hates what it represents. That says a lot in that film, how much somebody can come to hate themselves. And that makes me think of that scene in front of the mirror, Jules, the one with the makeup, because we both really talked about that. I don't know if you want to start us off on that one. So for those, again, it's that scene where Elizabeth Sparkle, Demi Moore's character, she's in front of a mirror. She's been invited out on a date by a guy who, childhood sweetheart, someone she went to school with, thinks she's incredible. He's still a man who thinks she is up there as a goddess, which she absolutely is. And yet, what happens?
Well, it is. I mean, it's not just us, is it? I think that it's interesting that most, even the negative reviews, will pick up on that scene as being quite moving. And essentially, what happens is she starts to put more and more makeup up, but each time it's wrong. And that you can see it in the trailer. She kind of viciously starts to turn herself into, I suppose, and again, that kind of carnivalesque, but it's not a joyous version. In this case, it's a real pain and a tragedy. And it's very violent. It's a self-violence, which leads also ultimately into her not going on this date and not feeling like she has the capability to step outside of her home. And I find that heartbreaking. And I think that, again, that's one of the tonal shifts that I've noticed there's been negative reviews around, in terms of some people saying, well, that's really moving and it felt out of place in the rest of the film. Actually, I think, again, that's why it is moving, because it's packaged by things that are quote unquote silly, and then you get this punch in the middle. And for me, it's not even specifically just about aging. I think I said to you, I can remember being 19 and at university and doing exactly that, with a 19-year-old's face, because I couldn't stand what I was seeing and thought, I cannot go out there. I cannot go out there and meet my friends because of kind of body dysmorphia and all of this stuff. So I think that moment really lands with a lot of people, and it might not even be gender specific. It's that moment of pure self-hatred and inability to see what's actually in front of you, and it is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking.
It was a really difficult scene to watch, I felt, because she's in this position where she's been rejected from a job she loves. She's been told she's old, she's not good enough anymore, she's not beautiful enough, they need a younger replacement. This guy thinks she's incredible. He wants to go on it. He can't believe she phones back and says, yes, I'll go with you. She could have had that experience of being adored. Who knows where that could have gone. And what saddens me again, and this again is a little bit of the sort of psychoanalytic stuff, is we never know what we really look like anyway to other people, because we only ever see ourselves reflected. It's always misrecognizing who you are. And it's why we don't like seeing ourselves. Like, I'm looking at myself on the screen here, because suddenly you see yourself how people see you and you're like, that's not me, or that's not how my voice sounds. So it's I think it's pointing up also that's that ridiculousness of it, that she isn't seeing herself anyway. She certainly isn't seeing herself from the perspective of this man who thinks she's beautiful, quite rightly, and special. I thought we were in for some horrific kind of poltergeist scene, where she was actually going to tear her face off, because she goes at it so hard. It left me kind of wanting to go, please stop, it hurts, and of course she doesn't go out, and it's heartbreaking. And it's like you said, younger girls do this with the body dysmorphia, and men too. I reflected on it for me, because you can't help, I think, as a woman watching this, sort of, certainly as a woman of our ages, so 40s and 50s respectively, we're going through life suddenly feeling that we are physically different and looking different. And things like noticing when I've put makeup on, my skin doesn't hold it the way it used to, and I changed the way I do my makeup. What suited me 5 years ago doesn't maybe look right now. And it's like, God, if I had a different take on myself, I'd be scrubbing that off and having a meltdown too. I feel quite robust, and I try to be, I'm generally very positive, and just think, well, then I do something different. I find a different way to make myself look a way that I feel happy with in my own skin, which I think is really important. But it's taken to such a sad extreme in that scene, and it killed me watching that. I really, really felt, and Demi Moore's performance is just extraordinary, and it's the self-destruction, the self-hatred, but it does sit in the continuum with the rest of the film. It's just because she's tonally shifting doesn't mean it doesn't fit. It's 2.5 hours of an assault on the senses that takes you from disgust to pity to horror to laughter to what the fuck am I looking at? And she orchestrates it. She's just pulling all those strings, I think, really beautifully, because it's 2 hours 20 something minutes. It's not a short movie. For me, it flew by. There wasn't a wasted scene in that film that didn't do something to advance that narrative. So it really hacks me off that people are, oh, like random reference. Oh, this is sad. This is silly. This is absurd. This is realistic. It's like, no, 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 no. Let this film exist in its own insane world because it works. I think it works.
Totally agree. I totally agree. Do you think, this is a question for you that we
Oh.
haven't discussed before? And
Oh
I was just
my God.
I know.
Uh-oh.
Here we go. I was just sort of thinking about this last night because I think we were both hilariously watching Trouble Every Day without even meaning to watch the same film, which is typical of us. But I suddenly thought, I wonder if it had been a French movie and it hadn't been Demi Moore, so it hadn't been this sort of internationally known star, that perhaps it was a well-known French star, but not necessarily internationally, would it have had a different reaction? Would it have sat sort of easier with people if it was a strange French, sort of somewhere in the coming out of French extremism canon? Is it because it was this sort of Hollywood movie, essentially, that people were expecting it to be less playful, almost?
A really good question. And it is something I thought of when I was watching Trouble Every Day last night. So Claire, again, anyone who's not familiar with the films of Claire Denis, not much happens, but it happens really beautifully, and it leaves you usually with a mood. I love her films. One of my favorite movies of hers, completely different, Vendredi Soir, which is just a woman packing up her apartment to move out and having a liaison with a man she's never met before she moves in with her fiance. That's all that happens. Broke my fucking heart watching that film. Absolutely. She does these things beautifully. But yeah, it's an art house film. And Trouble Every Day, in the version I saw on Mubi. So for those of you who are very as excited as we were, because I got people messaging me going, what the fuck, is this film actually streamable? Yes, it is. It's currently playing on Mubi UK. Not a plug. We're not sponsored. Just like it. I got on there straight away. The reproduction or the version of that film is not great. It's gritty. It doesn't look very sharp. It's not been remastered by the looks of it, but it gives it that auteur effect. It's still very art house, isn't it? There's not much dialogue in the whole film. It unfolds at a meandering pace. It builds up to some truly nasty. It's billed as vampire. I always thought it was a cannibal film for me.
Yeah, I found that interesting because it's only as I was sort of looking at the way it was listed yesterday, I was like, oh, vampirism. I guess there are crossovers, but that's another podcast, isn't it? Almost.
It is. It's 2001, or I think so. It's over 20 years old, and it did have a big name because, of course, Beatrice Dalle, Betty Blue, she's still a darling of the French cinema, and Vincent Gallo before all the controversy over the brown bunny, and let's not go there. Yeah, don't choke. Let's not make each other laugh. It has so much credibility to it because of that, and it's two really difficult to watch scenes presented as art house scene, where Beatrice Dalle and Vincent Gallo are basically either cannibal / vampires as a result of some kind of medical experimentation, and that's it. That's the whole film, where she eats the face off a young, really, it's a French actor who I thought was so beautiful in that film, Nicolas Duvauchel, who's after obviously sexual kicks, and of course it's the activation of their libido that makes them want to eat. And I'd forgotten there was one part of it that I'd totally forgotten about, where she's got a flap open on his shoulder, and she's just digging, she's laughing and she's giggling, she's digging into it and licking it, and he's just screaming, and half of his face has been eaten away. And then Vincent Gallo goes down on a poor young hotel worker and literally eats her out, which is something
Literally.
else to literally is really hard to watch. You don't see the gore, but the screaming is something else. But that's art house, so it's taken really seriously. I would say Fargeat's first two films are art house movies. Even if Revenge is an action movie, it's got a very art house sensibility. But you're right, Substance is Hollywood, so it's different. I think it I think it compares really well with something like Ducournau's Titane, which is such a fantasy and absurd. The main character, and I'm being wrong again, absurd is a compliment. I'm not being derogatory, because the whole idea that this female serial killer reconfigures her own face by repeatedly breaking her nose on a sink, can masquerade as the long lost missing son of a fireman, and then after a liaison with a car gives birth to a human car hybrid. That sounds fucking ridiculous. It works. It's one of the most moving films. I cried watching that film. I mean, it's grotesque, but I cried. The relationship between Vincent Lindon and Agathe Roussel's characters is just extraordinary when they know what's going on, but they manage to configure it so well. But because of the way it's presented, it won the Palme d'Or. It rightly won the Palme d'Or. Substance would not have won the Palme d'Or.
I mean, it is fascinating, isn't it? It's I mean, Titane is a different.
Oh wait, sorry. She got this. Did she not get the best screenplay at Cannes? Sorry, before I.
She did actually. Yeah, no, she did. She did,
one.
which was huge. You know, it's still absolutely huge, isn't it? It's certainly hadn't happened before. And I think that, yeah, Titane has maybe a different kind of tone, but it's also something that shifts massively, and that has, you know, the moment I remember being really moved by and sobbing is that dance scene between her and I've forgotten his name, the name of the character now. Essentially who she's thinking is the father, or they're pretending is the father at this point. And then, as you say, that is completely bookended by the most. I mean, when I went to see Titane, there were loads of people laughing, you know, when she's having sex with a car, or even when she's giving birth to this strange. God, we're doing loads of spoilers. I hope we have to do a little disclaimer at the beginning. You know, giving birth to this weird cybernetic baby, and yet because it's French, and because I don't know, maybe there's an expectation already set up by Julia Ducournau. It's like it's accepted in a different way. I mean, I guess Trouble Every Day was panned at the time, so that's interesting.
It's true. It's true. It's become a classic, hasn't it? And again, it's genre, isn't it? It's. I think in horror we're much more open to stuff being a bit more batshit and bonkers. Than in other genres. And I guess also because, you know, we are officially in spooky season at time of recording, you know, depending on when everyone picks this up, it is the 12th of October. We are heading towards Halloween, and Terrifier 3 has just opened. Yeah. And I haven't seen any of them. I kind of made the decision not to, having seen fair chunks of them. I'm like, actually, no disrespect to Damien Leone for making films that have been incredibly popular, and Art the Clown's become quite the classic horror character. I just don't need some of that in my head, frankly. And I think Substance has fallen into the same almost like shock tactic reviews that Terrifier 3 has. This is the gore. This is what happens. And it's like, I'm not saying Damien Leone's film is got any kind of complex message in there. Sorry, mate. I don't know. I can't diss a film I haven't watched. But The Substance does have a lot going on, and I think it has suffered from these kinds of reviews of, oh my God, it's the gore. Oh my God, it's this. Oh my God, it's that. And it's like she's using that medium to tell a very interesting, very nuanced story that should be making people ask a lot of questions, not be judgmental about the message that she's trying to convey. I don't think she's conveying a message, specifically one message. There's a whole load of stuff in there that she's exploring and leaving it to you to ponder over. And I think it's a shame when films like this get hijacked by sensationalist reviews, especially when people, and we know this, journalists are under pressure to see the movie, give it a rating out of 5 and get a review out. And we all know that within a couple of days, you start having different thoughts about the film. You see more in it, or maybe you like it less because you get this rash of 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. And so, actually, it's not that great. Having had a couple of days away from it. And yeah, I think it suffered in comparison with horror as a genre, because I think it is a horror film in terms of body horror and the monstrous feminine and the abject and all those kinds of things. But it's a very, very clever, like a lot of horror is, it's a very clever social commentary. It tells us a lot about the time we live in.
Exactly. I think that it, I remember interviewing Robert Morgan, who's just quite big at the moment for stop motion. I mean, he was big anyway, but he's just done stop motion, which is doing
yes,
really well.
yes, very good.
Fantastic animator, fantastic filmmaker. And I remember I got him in to do a talk with my students, and one of the questions they asked, because his work is terrifying, and they said, what scares you? Like, what's an example of what you find really frightening? And he said, well, it isn't really horror films. Like, I can't really name you horror films that scare me. And then he went, oh, hang on. And he said, oh, it's those weird body melts of the sort of 1970s and 80s. And do you remember this? Like, it was like a weird little rash again and it must have been a special effect that people happen to be. Basically, it's like a stop motion of color. So you'd get almost like when the wax melts of millions of different candles, and you'd get those kind of rainbow colors. But do you know what I mean?
Don't tell me the ending of Raiders of the Lost Ark is not pure horror when the Nazi's face completely melts. And that was for children. That was the thing that stuck in my head.
And that's it. He was talking about the kind of uncanny, as a child in particular, watching this stuff and going, okay, it's reality, but it's not reality. It's something your mind recognizes, but still goes, but that doesn't happen. And I think there's something that he really understands about the importance of the schlock of horror. And that's what I think what Coralie Fargeat has. I think she knows what she's referencing, and she's sort of purposefully not ignoring those and trying to kind of peg them on these highbrow references that might maybe kind of give it a different clout. And I think it's also because there's humor in it. There's a heck of a lot of humor in The Substance, as well as the heartbreaking, punching stuff. And it is a really serious film, like we were saying at the beginning of this. But that doesn't negate the fact that she's using humor as quite a clever tool to get us inside this discussion. And it is a discussion, like you said. I don't think this is a message. It's not saying plastic surgery is good, plastic surgery is bad, medical beauty intervention is bad or good. It's just getting us to kind of think about what we're doing to ourselves, and particularly what we're doing to women.
Well, exactly. And I think there's two really important points there about the horror genre. And one is, can we avoid origin stories and morals of stories that tie it up with a neat bow and tell you what to think? I hate that. I hate that so much. I don't want to know how a serial killer came to be. I don't want to know Mike Myers' origins. Michael Myers, for me, is the most scary horror villain ever, because he's just implacable and he doesn't fucking stop until you get to Halloween Ends, and then it's shit. But we won't talk about that. I've dissed David Gordon Green too much in public. But you don't want things explained. It stops it being scary. You want lots of unanswered questions that you go away going, fuck, what happens now? Where did they go? What's going to happen now? And also, the best horror for me always has a dark vein of comedy in it. She's really pushing the comedy value. But something like, I'll say this, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I stayed away from that film for years thinking it would fuck me up really badly. I watched it and thought, masterpiece made by film students, basically film graduates, with a budget that was nothing. How cleverly it's made that you see nothing and it's all in your imagination. It's also basically a black comedy. It's completely absurd. There's a scene with Leatherface chainsaws the door, and there's a comment in the background, it's like, your brother's just destroyed the door, could he just not open it? And it's like, well, yes, hello. And I told you, I mean, I told Sarah Barbe Brown about this when she came to the show, and to our show, that her episode talking with Anna Boggett-Skyer on the Final Girls podcast about Leatherface trying to cook a dinner, but these fucking kids won't leave him alone, and he's just sitting there holding his head, and he's whimpering in that after he's killed Kurt with the mallet. He's like, I've put her on the hook, and they just keep coming, and it's, oh my god, I'm so stressed. I'm ready to wear this face that's made of someone else's skin, and I've got to host a dinner party. And you just can't take it seriously. But then it flips it with the most distressing scenes, purely psychological. You see nothing in that film, nothing. And I think Fargeat takes the comedy aspect of the horror. She really gives you horror. I mean, there's stuff where you're just like, oh, I don't know if I can look. What is she doing with that? Oh my god, it's a Spinal Tap. Oh my god. she takes abjection way off the scale to a point where you're just like, I think, I'm actually feeling a bit queasy here, but I can't look away because it's too interesting. And she slams the comedy value into it in a way that I just haven't seen done before. It's a proper horror comedy. It is a proper horror comedy. Someone like I say, I was watching Alice Lowe's film today, Revenge. She cuts the guy's neck off and you actually see it. And it's like, yeah, and it's funny. Sorry, it is. It's really, really funny. Yeah. Because there's a reason for it, guys. If you watch Revenge, it's one of the best films. And she directed it when she was pregnant, with hopefully what wasn't ending up being a demon baby that told her to kill people. But I think when horror comedy gets it right, it's spot on, and I think she does. It's just big in your face, technicolor, shiny and modern in a way people don't normally see horror films. I think that's probably what's confused a lot of people. That doesn't sound too patronizing. I think she's given it an aesthetic you don't normally associate with body horror, and these big questions, and that's kind of thrown people in terms of it looks so Hollywood, but now I don't know what to do with it.
I think that's a really good point, because I think that body horror as a kind of use of language or terminology, people automatically go to Cronenberg. And agreed, I love Cronenberg. I think there's some extraordinary stuff, but it's a very different brand of body horror. It is, as you say, it's very intellectual. And I think that the stuff that she's leaning into with body horror, there's some weird kind of ownership, people really wanting to define body horror and say what is and what isn't. And I'm always like, why do you have to kind of do this? Why can you not allow things to cross over? But actually, I think that the references that she's leaning into are more akin to things like Poltergeist or Evil Dead, that kind of really blood splurting everywhere, things falling apart, things being really ridiculously, explosively bodily, but not based in any kind of real science. And that, I think, again, is a knowing use of that particular language. It's a choice. It's not about trying to give you some scientific, realistic idea of what the substance could be and would look like. And it's fascinating, actually. It's fascinating that it's had a bit of a kind of backlash for that reason, instead of just being allowed to exist in the same way as, I don't know, Wes Anderson is not, that's a fantasy, but nobody kind of really questions that because it's Wes Anderson. It's not horror.
It's funny, isn't it? Because he also has such a distinct style. His characters are very mannered. He's even got this kind of very pastel color scheme, all these kinds of things. But every once in a while, I'm going to sneeze now, which is really annoying. Everyone's like, yeah, it's a Wes Anderson film, excuse me. And you come to expect it. I think in just the two features and the shorts she's made, she's created her entire style as well. Yeah. Why is that not okay? Because it's horror and it doesn't seem to fit with horror. Excuse me, there's never one. There's never just one, is there? And it always has to. I got a coughing fit before I went to Watershed today as well. I was like, please stop. And it's just body always horror. At the wrong time. It is. See, we're talking about body horror. I'm expunging things. It's I'm demonstrating the abject live in a podcast. It's disgusting. What are you drinking, by the way?
It looks exciting. It looks on camera like it's very pink, but it's just like a sort of, I don't know, raspberry juice.
Okay.
But it looks like something from an 80s horror, doesn't it?
It looks like something from The Substance. I'm like, what the hell are you drinking while we're talking of podcast? You're putting into your body, Juliet. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I'm looking at the time. We've been going for just over an hour, so we probably should look to wrap this up. But I think that's a really good place to finish. It's not a straightforward movie. And I think people have gone in maybe and tried to put a template on it. And she's seeping out from the edges of that template because it just doesn't fit. That film is so many things. It's also uniquely a Coralie Fargeat film, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, one thing we haven't mentioned that is really interesting in that film is that Elizabeth Smart doesn't seem to interact with any other women at any point. She doesn't seem to have any networks. There's no partner, there's no family, there's no friend. And there's something about, I don't know, I think that the sadness of that situation, that choosing to do it in that kind of comedy horror language is what can allow us to get closer to that without just being completely turned off by how sad this is going to be. And again, that's what I mean by making quite intelligent decisions around how you're going to tell the story. And I think Coralie Fargeat does it. She does the same with Revenge. As much as I struggle with Revenge, I think there is comedy within that as well.
There is, yeah.
Comedy, right? But it is there. And it's sort of saying, I'm going to make a decision to tell this story in a kind of hyper real way, because then we've kind of got access to it in a way that perhaps we would be turned off otherwise.
It's a good point, actually, because Sparkle she's a very kind of siphoned off character. And I think that's what Fargeat does. And you're right, she does it with Revenge, because in Revenge, the whole thing takes place somewhere so far away they have to be helicoptered in and out. It's completely isolated. It exists completely in its own world with its own rules. And so does The Substance. And I think she does that very deliberately, because she can then foreground exactly what she wants without having to create a realistic world that is distracting. Like if she'd taken that and set it on the streets of New York, too much detail. What she wants is clean, bright, Technicolor, shiny and smooth, so that you're sitting there marveling at this thing that you're seeing, like you do with Revenge, with the Technicolor of it. And the same thing, a massive modern room with big glass windows out onto a space you don't recognize. It's exactly the same. She's got this very unique vision. And I think that's what she does. She takes away all the extraneous details and says, here's exactly what I want to show you. This is what I want you to look at. She doesn't have a fully formed life for a reason. And that's because her appearance and her body is the focus of that film.
Yeah. God, you've said something really interesting there that I hadn't thought about in terms of the connection between Revenge and The Substance, is they both have those big open panelled glass windows. So you've got that filter of lens, right? You've got that filter of the gaze. That's super interesting.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Well done, Tracy. A+.
Thank you so much. A+. Detail spotter. You know I'm trained as a continuity supervisor, don't you? I notice these things.
Very good.
God, what an arsehole. No, it's true. Yeah, she's got an aesthetic that really works, because in fact Reality Plus is set in what looks potentially like a vaguely recognizable Paris, but there's buildings there that don't exist in normal Paris. It's obviously a Paris of the future, and it is a bit jarring when it's in what you recognize as normal Paris. You can see it's like a place in transition. But The Substance and Revenge work really well, I think, as pieces together, that she is this fully realized universe that she likes her characters to inhabit, and all she wants you to see is what she's directing your attention to, because she's the director. She's written those screenplays. There's no extraneous detail, and you can't make it real. And I think maybe that's what people are struggling with, or how maybe the brain struggles with it. I don't mean to sound patronizing, but you can't put reality, you can't impose a real framework on those movies. They're jarring because there's something about them that's hyper realistic and somewhere between hyper real and unreal.
Yeah, which is uncanny, isn't it? That's the thing we're talking about. Yeah.
That's the thing. It's the uncanny. it's the stuff that looks familiar but isn't quite. That's really distressing. And coming back to your point about Robert Morgan with stop motion and him saying it was the melting, for me the most frightening horror is the uncanny. And when a comedy horror, the first thing that scared the shit out of me for a long time was watching The League of Gentlemen.
Yeah, good example. Yeah, which is very similar language. Yeah,
scared the bejesus out of me. Again, you put everybody in this locale that exists in a time out of time, and people stray into it and they're like, what the hell is this? This is not real. You've got all these slightly grotesque characters. Again, there's a lot of abject in there, lots of body ick. And a character like Papa Lazarus, the first time I saw the Christmas special, I was bricking it.
Yeah. Oh, it's terrifying, the Christmas special. Yeah, agreed.
And I think it's rarefied, it's abstract, it's abject, it's grotesque, and it's also funny. She's in a tradition with lots of horror. It just looks bright and shiny in a way people, I think, just were a bit taken aback by.
Totally agree. Is that a good space for us to wrap up, do you think, Tracy Heather-Johnson?
I think it is, Juliet Sugg.
Tracy Heather-Johnson, what are we about to do in a couple of weeks' time that we should probably add before we sign off?
We probably shouldn't. We should. We are opening the second run of our exhibition, which is called Deviant: Women, Sex and the Monstrous Erotic. So we're all about all of that. And we open at our space in Bristol, which is in Yard, was Colston Yard. It is just near the Christmas steps for those of you who know Bristol. So Juliet and I will be there Saturday and Sunday, the 26th and 27th of October. And anyone can come in between 11 and 5 at that time. And then it will be open by appointment with hours until November the 3rd when it comes down. But it is Juliet's amazing artwork in dialogue with my poetry, my wonderful poetry, she says, selling that, big that up. a chicken and the egg, which came first? Neither. We really did riff off each other's work in this. Going around is a really interesting experience to see how the works have all sort of spoken to each other. So yes, please come and say hello. We'd love to see you. We've got catalogues for sale with all the work in it, loads more stuff. They're really nice, numbered, limited pieces to have. We have prints for sale, and of course all the original art and poetry is also available for sale if you'd want some of our lovely work in your home or office.
In your office, that'd be a good one.
Isn't it? Just so you can keep the whole idea of the monstrous and all these wonderful, gooey, disgusting, grotesque and sexy things we've been talking about right in your face the whole time. That's what we do.
Fabulous. All right.
Excellent. So thank you, Jules. I think we've finally got that out of our system in some kind of way that felt vaguely structured, even though we didn't plan it. And keep an eye out for more. We are going to be doing more of these. We're probably looking at doing once a month once we've got ourselves up and running, and we'll be starting to we'll get guest speakers on. I think we're probably looking at covering lots of things, aren't we? So film, literature, visual art, photography. We do lots of different things. So we've kicked off with a film because that is our horror film is our passion, and it's how we both cross paths. So we hope you enjoyed listening to us blethering on and swearing and spoiling all the films for you that we did. What did we ruin? We've ruined we've ruined Substance, Revenge, Reality Plus, Trouble Every Day,
bit of Poltergeist,
Titane. Sorry,
something at the end we added, didn't we? Can't remember. Sorry, not sorry. There we go. All right, well, until next time, we have been the Deviant Collective. Look forward to seeing you soon.